Hi, I think I must be the last person in the world to have got hold of the OM Services Om-1 camera. I ordered mine just after they were announced, the day after they were announced, and it just never came. And everybody I bumped into had got one, all of my friends had got one who'd ordered them, just me. And I think the mistake I made was here in the UK, I should have ordered it either off Wex Photographic, Park Cameras, or the London Camera Exchange. I'm told that they tend to get the priority, they get the most of these cameras. I ordered it from a different shop, so I had a long wait. I've always said, however, it is amazing how quickly new camera equipment turns up on the second-hand market. So 6 days ago I was able to buy a second-hand Om-1, and they've only been out, what, 3 or 4 weeks, something like that. But it was the same for the 150 to 400mm Olympus lens as well. 12-month waiting list for those if you ordered one new. I couldn't face a 12-month waiting list, so I didn't, and I got one of those second-hand too. And with the Om-1 body, I also saved myself £300 by getting it second-hand. So I've had one for 6 days, and I've been trying very hard to test it out on bird in flight photography. The first films that I saw that were really showing birds in flight, Roger Hantz posted one, and that was short-eared owls. And not many days after that, Andy Rouse posted some films as well with some more challenging stuff, including goldfinches. And that interested me because that was, say, quite difficult for autofocus. Andy kept referring to the fact that most of the shots were sharp, and he kept repeating most, and that was a bit worrying, because if you've got a Sony A1, which is the other camera system I've got, and I want to compare the Olympus to, you wouldn't use the term most, you would say nearly all are sharp. But one person's meaning of the word most is not the same as somebody else's, so you can't really tell. Anyway, those are the only 2 films that I'd seen, but since I've had the camera I've been trying very hard to do birds in flight. This cemetery is not too far from where I live, and it's very good for wood pigeons. I made my YouTube film on wood pigeons here. They're very numerous, very tame, and they're very active. The peak of the breeding season for wood pigeons is August, and now it's April, but there's 2 nests already which they're building. There's another nest they're prospecting for, but there's a lot of activity. They chase each other around this churchyard. They fly from one tombstone to the other, chasing each other. So I've had 4 sessions here in 6 days. That's about a 2-hour session each time. Then I go home and look at the pictures, come back and try something different the next day. And I've had 1 session at Slimbridge. So I'm not going to make you agonise until the end of the film before I tell you what I think about the bird tracking autofocus on the Om-1. I'll tell you now, right at the start. So the first question is the bird tracking autofocus on the Om-1 better than on the M1X? Yes, drastically better. But then again, it was pretty awful on the M1X. It worked on a bird on a perch or on the floor when it's slow moving, and you could see it was tracking the eye. But as soon as a bird launched into flight, it would lose it. So the Om-1 is much, much better. Second question, is the autofocus bird tracking on the Om-1 good? Is it really worth having? Yes, it's fantastic. If you like photographing birds in flight, you will do far, far better with the Om-1. It's drastically better than any other Olympus camera you've used. But then the third question, is the bird tracking autofocus on the Om-1 as good as on the Sony A1? Well, that question I'm going to make you agonise over and wait to the end of the film. I've got a very important job to do first. Whenever I buy a new camera, the first day out with it, I always do the same test. I set it up on a tripod. I point the camera at the distance, maybe 200 meters away, infinity basically. I put it into manual focus, and then I put it out of focus. I turn it so the background is just a blur. And then I take a whole series of pictures, and I start from a very low ISO, 50 ISO, 100 ISO, 200 ISO, all the way through up to the maximum ISO, just 1 picture at each setting. Notice I do 1 stop increments. I'm not interested in 1/3 increments. If you do 1/3 increments, it's very hard to tell one picture from the next. It's just such a subtle change. So if you do 1 stop increments, you stand a chance of seeing the difference. And then when I get home, I look at those pictures on my computer, and I process them in the normal way, whatever is the normal way. That's become a bit more complicated now because my normal processing is to use DxO Pure Raw, but it doesn't work with the Olympus RAW files yet. But whatever is your normal way of processing, that's what you'd do. And then you bring them up on the computer screen and decide where you think the noise level starts to become a bit of a nuisance, a bit intrusive. And if you get to, let's say, 3200 before you notice any noise, then 1600 becomes my default setting. And I say I've always done this test. It means I'm making up my mind where I think noise starts to become a nuisance, rather than somebody else's opinion or something you've read on the internet. It's a very quick test to do. It take me about 1 minute to do it, and it will only take me about 1 minute to view the pictures as well. You don't go pixel peeping. You want to look at the pictures full size and just make a very quick decision. You don't have to stick to that 1600. It's just a benchmark, a starting point, and over a period of time you might start to swing one way or the other and go a bit higher or a bit lower, but at least you've got a starting point and it's your own opinion. So let's start by looking at those ISO pictures. This is 100 ISO. I don't spend much time on this. 200 ISO, just a quick glance. 400 ISO, no zooming in to look at them, just full size. 800 ISO, that's 1600, and that's 3200, and that's where I feel the noise is starting to come in. 6400, 12800, 25,600, 51,200, and then 65,535. I don't think I'll be using that ISO very much, but 3,200 was the first time I saw noise, so we'll go back to 1,600, which is this one. That's going to be my default setting with this camera, and I say it's just a starting point. I can vary it from here, but 1,600 is what I will normally use to start with. So look at some of the birds in flight. This bird starts off sharp, but he's not going at right angles to me. He's tapering away slightly, so that makes it difficult. It loses the focus on the eye there, and then it comes back. It's back in focus. And this is going to be a repeated theme. It goes from being in focus, like now, and it goes on a few frames and it loses the focus. So it's lost it at this point. There it's in focus again. And I started to think, was it when the wing went across the eye? Well, sometimes it was and sometimes it wasn't. There it's out of focus still, and then it recovers. So it's back in focus here. Then it loses it again. In focus at this point. Now there's a difference here between the Sony A1. The Sony A1 would not keep losing the focus. Once it's got it, it would keep it, and the chances are it would get it at the beginning. So this is remarkable, the Olympus camera, but it's just not quite as good as that Sony. Now we'll just go quickly through these. It keeps doing it, losing and regaining focus, but then as the bird lands, it's back into focus at this point. And these are all sharp now. Another one is going at right angles now, so it's not tapered away from me, so this is better opportunity, and they're in focus at the beginning, and then it loses the focus just a touch there, gone slightly soft, but then it will come back again. So it's out of focus at that point, but here as it comes into land, you actually end up with both birds sharp in that picture there. And the next one too. Now another difficult one because the background's very messy. It's not quite in focus at the beginning, it's slightly soft. Then the focus comes in. It's probably more difficult for you to see this than me. You're looking on a compressed YouTube film. I'm looking at the original files, way out of focus there, but look how it recovers and comes back into focus, and then it loses it again and then comes back in again. Now this is a good opportunity. It's out in the open, the sun was shining. Now the sun actually goes in just as the bird takes off, but nevertheless the shutter speeds are high for all these pictures. This is 3,200th of a second. Another good opportunity because it's fairly clear and it's coming slightly towards me as well as going across me. So they're all in focus at the beginning. This is working well. Still sharp. And still sharp. And then it loses it. Gone slightly soft there, and then comes back into focus again. Now this becomes quite interesting now. I'm struggling to keep it in the frame, but as it rises up, it's in focus at that point. Now these are all at 50 frames per second. Now it's going to go behind that tombstone. It's in focus when it starts to go in, and obviously it loses the focus now because we can't see it. But watch how quickly it recovers and comes into focus. That's remarkable. The Sony A1 could also do that, and I say that Sony does tend to stay on focus at a far higher percentage rate than the Olympus. But it does occur to me that this is just a simple tweak. This is the sort of thing that could be fixed with a firmware update. And it's often amazed me. Oh, there's another shot here. This is coming towards us now, and they're in focus at the beginning, and it loses it there, and there's a couple of frames where it's not sharp, and they're back into focus again. So say it's a firmware tweak could well put this sort of problem right. This is a difficult one now. It's going away from me again, but it still manages to get a few of them sharp on that eye. And I've always noticed how modern cameras, when they're first released, within a few weeks of being released, a firmware update is available. And I'm just sort of hoping that might be the case with the Om-1, because it is very close to the same performance as the Sony A1. Another interesting one because it's coming towards you and it's in focus, it's locking on well. Still in focus, and then it loses it there. That one's just gone out of focus and then back into focus. 2 frames out, one in, then one out again. It goes across the tree, and on the last frame on the tree, it's about there it is. That's gone sharp on the tree, and unfortunately I wasn't able to keep the swing going to follow the bird after that. Just look at another folder with some examples in. I'll start from about here. This is a relatively easy shot because it's against the blue sky and they're all in focus at the beginning, and then it loses it. It's gone out of focus there, and then it comes back in there. That one's sharp again, and it does keep doing this. These are all sharp. No, those are out of focus now. Completely out of focus. Then it drifts back into focus again and goes out of focus. Another interesting one because it's come from behind the tree and it's out of focus at this point. But then it recovers, it's back into focus. I tried various things to see if I could improve it. I tried shooting at 25 frames per second instead of 50. That made no difference. I tried the Olympus 300mm lens instead of the 150 to 400, and that made no difference. I mean, it's half a stop brighter. I thought it might help. Now these just keep coming and going. That focus is sometimes there and sometimes it isn't on this particular sequence. And I certainly tried messing about with the continuous autofocus sensitivity. It should be on -2. That's my belief. That makes it more sticky. But I tried it the other way as well. I put it to the maximum on the plus side. None of it made any difference. So at Slimbridge, we've got a Gadwell here. Slightly soft when I first picked it up. Then it comes into focus, it's nice and sharp now, and as it goes up against the sky, this should be easy for the autofocus to be able to follow. And it's in focus at this point, and then about here it goes soft there. That shot slightly soft, getting fast shutter speed, so it just keeps drifting out of focus. I'll finish off with a good one. Kept coming in with a nesting stick, so it's quite a short flight and a very predictable flight. So it's a remarkable camera. I'm very impressed with it. Just needs a slight tweak to just improve it just that little bit. Now, I've used the Sony A1 for long enough to know that overall it would have performed better than the OM1. It would have been more consistent in locking on and keeping the bird in flight. However, like all statistics and numbers, you can distort things and twist things around. So now I'm going to play the part of a politician who has just lost the general election, but is now on breakfast television the following morning trying to justify the results and actually claim that really they should have won the election if the circumstances were slightly different. So here we go. The OM1 takes 50 frames per second, and as Andy Rouse quite rightly said, most of them are sharp. That is a good description for the percentage that are sharp. Now, if we ignore the sequences when the bird was flying slightly away from me, which I wouldn't normally take, I only took those because I was testing it. Normally I want the bird going across me at right angles or coming towards me slightly or even directly. So we ignore the sequences where it was going away from me, which is where the failure rate was the highest, and you could probably say you're getting about 40 out of every 50 pictures per second right. So that's 40 good pictures. Now the Sony A1 shoots at a maximum of 30 frames per second, but that's only in certain circumstances. I think I get about 27 frames per second from the Sony A1, and let's be very generous and say they're all going to be sharp, which is possible with that camera, but you've only got 27 pictures sharp, whereas the Olympus is giving you 40 pictures sharp per second. So the Olympus actually wins. The OM1 also scores because it's better at the initial acquisition of focus. When you've got a bird sitting in a bush, every mirrorless camera I've owned has the same problem. It doesn't always pick up on the bird, it ignores it, it doesn't even begin to autofocus. You can solve it. You can point the camera down at the floor at approximately the same distance, then go back up to the bird, or you can set up a button so it changes it to single focus point, and once it's locked onto the bird, then the bird tracking will take over. But it's a bit of a nuisance. I haven't had that once with the OM1 so far. I pointed at a bird, it locks onto it straight away. Very impressive. So it's early days yet. I've only had the camera 6 days. I want to try it over several weeks or even months. I'll probably go into the summer as I keep testing it. Hopefully for next weekend I'll be able to produce another film where I'm talking about the autofocus abilities, perhaps on Gigwin Farm. Thanks for watching.